Aloha, I'm Kat Brady of Community Alliance on Prisons. Welcome to another edition of Hawaii Injustice. We're going to talk about the overrepresentation, the disparate treatment of Native Hawaiians in the criminal justice system. In September 2010, OHA released a report called The Disparate Treatment of Native Hawaiians in the Criminal Justice System. This report looked at all contact that Native Hawaiians have with the criminal justice system, from arrest through reentry. It was very interesting because it revealed that Hawaiians are 24% of the population, yet the Department of Public Safety constantly says that Hawaiians are about 40% of the criminal justice system, of those incarcerated, rather. And anyone who's been in any of our state facilities knows that that number is very low. The number of Native Hawaiians is closer to 60 to 70% of our incarcerated population. And when you look at the contract prisons, the state contracts with 2 prisons, private corporate prisons in Arizona, in Eloy, Arizona. Saguaro is one, where we have about 1,600 men, and Red Rock Correctional Center is the other, which is right across the street from Saguaro in Eloy, Arizona. They house about 50 of our men currently. So, and what's really interesting is that the Native Hawaiians are the largest population that is sent from our prisons to the contract prisons. And this is because Corrections Corporation of America is allowed to come into our State Department of Public Safety, go through the files, and choose which inmates they would like to bring with them to Arizona. They have even said that they choose to bring more Native Hawaiians because they are, quote unquote, more docile. Well, that report came out in 2010, and it showed that Native Hawaiians serve longer times on probation, longer times on parole, longer sentences of incarceration than any other ethnicity in our correctional system. So when you look at that, you'd have to say, why are most people incarcerated? Well, in Hawaii, the majority of our incarcerated population are nonviolent drug offenders. And when you look at drug use, it's very well known that drug use is even across the socioeconomic spectrum, meaning that drug use is pretty even among all populations in Hawaii. Yet who is being incarcerated? It's Native Hawaiians. In 2009, 39% of the people sent to incarceration for drug crimes were Native Hawaiian. Something is very wrong. The legislature has acknowledged something is very wrong. So in 2011, they appointed a task force. They established a task force to make recommendations to them about why, not about why Native Hawaiians are over-incarcerated, but why, what we can do to remedy this situation. This is not a new idea. Actually, when Vice President Biden was a member of the Senate, he actually introduced a bill called Racial Impact Statements, because he wanted to know the number of people that we are processing through the criminal justice system. What is the impact that is having on their communities? That bill didn't pass, but states like Connecticut, Iowa, they have passed racial impact statements because they've gone into their facilities, looked throughout their criminal justice system, and realized that the majority of people who get caught in the criminal justice web are people of color. Something is wrong, they acknowledged. One would think that in Hawaii, such a multicultural place where Native Hawaiians are the first peoples of this land, that we would actually be questioning, why are so many Native Hawaiians processed through the criminal system? Why, when we know that the majority of our people are incarcerated for nonviolent drug crimes, why are Native Hawaiians the ones that go to prison for longer sentences, longer times on probation, longer times on parole? What is going on? So this task force is charged with making recommendations that will reduce the contact that Native Hawaiians have with the criminal justice system. Well, the task force didn't actually, this passed in 2011, and the first meeting didn't happen until November 29th, 2011. And it's been kind of a rocky, bumpy ride. At the first several meetings, the task force is composed of 9 members. A public defender, Jack Tanaki, who's the head of the public defender's office, the AG, or his designee, and that person is Paul Perone, who's the statistician. He issues the state crime reports for the AG's office. The prosecutor, or his designee, and his designee is Patricia Nakamatsu, and the Department of Public Safety director or his designee, and that person is Martha Torney, who's the Deputy Director for Administration at the Department of Public Safety, and a long, long history of working in the criminal justice system. OHA, the CEO of OHA, Kamana'o Pono Crab, is another member. Judge Perkins, who's the head of the Intermediate Court of Appeals, who used to be head of the Corrections Population Management Commission, a criminologist, Raydeen Karasuda, who has done extensive work on Native Hawaiians in the criminal justice system, Cheryl Marlowe, who's the head of adult probation for the judiciary, and one other person. Who is that? And one other, Michael Broderick, who is representing the community. So at the second meeting of this task force, there was a big discussion, and I asked who was the chairperson. And they basically said, or some people on the task force said that there was no chairperson. And I read to them the legislation, which said, you know, there needs to be a chairperson that's chosen by the 9-member, task force. There was some reluctance about choosing a chairperson. And I said, you know, when this comes, the report comes to the legislature is not going to expect 9 people to go before the committee. They're going to ask who is the chairperson and have that person deliver the report. So Michael Broderick, who's a former family court judge and now the head of the YMCA of Honolulu, stepped up and said he would be the chairperson. He has been a very even person as the chairperson. He has tried to be very inclusive. He acknowledges that some community members attend the meetings. I have attended almost all of them when I've been available. And he always makes time at the meeting for the community to share their input. We had to do a little wrestling to get some documents like the agenda and some documents that they were talking about, but luckily OIP, the Office of Information Practices, which is the agency that actually enforces the open meetings law and open records law, told OHA, you have to make these things available because the task force is an open meeting and the public is involved. So we won that one. But it's been a very bumpy ride. From the very beginning, the AG's office and their designee, Paul Perone, has really done his best to try to stall anything from happening. So at one early meeting, he queried, well, why aren't we talking about Micronesians who are a rising population in our correctional and criminal justice system? And he was reminded that the report is about Native Hawaiians in the criminal justice system. So all throughout the meetings, there's been this kind of stalling, wordsmithing, trying to divert the task force from its mission. And its mission is they need to develop recommendations to present to the 2013 legislature. This has been really a struggle, and I give Michael Broderick a big high five, because he has been modulated and patient while Mr. Perone has made some remarks that have just been, some could say they were racist, sexist, really, really ugly. And he's made statements such as, well, there's many Hawaiians in the criminal justice system because they're criminals. And yet in other parts of the report, he says this with absolutely citing no research. And he basically says, you know, for every other thing in the report, you need to cite research. You need to cite that. How can you say that? So at a recent meeting, there was a discussion about visitation. And he actually said, well, you know, what's the research on that? Yeah, visitation is good, but, you know, what's the research? Well, there is a plethora, a boatload of research on how keeping people connected with their loved ones, their families, or significant others actually reduces recidivism. And probably one of the biggest studies came out of California, which showed that people who have visitation from 3 people 3 times over a year, their recidivism rate is really low compared to somebody who has no visitation. And they are almost always recidivating. So what we're talking about is, how do we reduce the number of people who are incarcerated? How do we help people connect with the community? If you deny visitation, and this has been a huge problem in Hawaii, where at Halava, sometimes for 3 months, people are not allowed to see their families. They make the journey to the prison and then they're told, oh, sorry. And many times they find out their loved one was either shipped to Arizona or to another prison, and the family had no knowledge of this. So we really need to do better. Under the new leadership of public safety, we feel somewhat hopeful because the current director actually understands the importance of keeping people connected with their loved ones and significant others. There are 3 things that keep people out of prison: meaningful, positive relationships, safe and secure housing, and meaningful work. Those are 3 things that actually help everybody be more pro-social and fulfill their potential. But there are 3 definite things that have been identified by the What Works research, which is widely known. That is what keeps people out of prison. So knowing this, it was kind of startling to hear Mr. Perone say, well, where's the research on employment and housing? I mean, we know that's a good thing, but, you know, where's the research? Finally, the Department of Public Safety representative, Ms. Torney, spoke up and said, this is widely established. This is something everybody knows. And we keep having these discussions when this research is really widely known. To which Mr. Perone said, well, maybe you know it because you're in the criminal justice system and, you know that. Well, visitation has been reported, or the lack thereof has been reported in the media over the last several years, probably the last 10 years, because it's been a constant problem where visits are canceled, people get there, they can't see their loved one because it's short-staffed, there's nobody to monitor the visitation, and they're basically sent home. So we know this is a huge problem. I think anybody who reads the paper or watches television, there have been many, many reports on this. So to constantly be questioning things that are widely known, not just by criminologists, but by people who watch television, by people who read newspapers. Anybody would know this, and yet we spend countless time on these kinds of issues. This has been a huge, huge problem. At the last meeting, or at a prior meeting, we spent 40 minutes on one issue. The meetings are scheduled for 2 hours. So you can see that it's very difficult to move ahead when every word is nitpicked, is manipulated, is discussed, and then we'll move on to the next point, and then it's, oh, by the way, going back to this point. Finally today, Judge Broderick said, you know, we all agreed on this, and those who didn't agree had provisional agreement, but we're moving on, because this has been just a basic stalling tactic. The prosecutor's office and the AG's office, they absolutely hate this report. They hate the fact that we're actually looking at why so many Native Hawaiians have contact with the criminal justice system. And they've done their darndest to actually make sure that the task force is stymied and doesn't make many recommendations. Well, what's been interesting is that an attorney and a writer has been hired to write the report. So the last several meetings have been reviewing his findings, and we haven't even gotten to his recommendations yet. But today at the last meeting, we went through 7 points in 2 hours. And there's like 6 or 8 pages of findings. We haven't even gotten to the recommendations. So when you think about getting a report to the legislature by December 20th, it's very scary, because I'm sure the writer has had to be up at night and working every weekend, because he keeps getting all this kind of wordsmithing stuff. I have sat on many task forces. I have observed many. I have never been to one where they actually try to put the report together as a group. You know, the definition of a camel is a horse designed by committee. It is very difficult to have 9 people put something together. Generally, a report is written. It goes out by email to the task force members, and the task force members make recommendations. I have never, ever been on a task force that has wordsmithed a report. And this, of course, has been to the pleasure of the prosecutor and the AG, because they've been able to stall the discussion and wear people out. So it's been very discouraging. But I have to add some kudos to Chair Michael Broderick, who has been very patient, very modulated, very inclusive, trying to get everybody's buy-in on things. But this has been a really onerous process that has worn out the committee members, and they're not even done yet. So I want you to ask yourself, why do you think there are so many Native Hawaiians in the criminal justice system, when you know that the majority of people in our facilities or who have contact with the criminal justice system are nonviolent drug users? There are many things we could do, and finally at the last meeting we talked about alternatives to incarceration, which is going to become a recommendation. And that recommendation is going to be things that Community Alliance on Prisons has been pushing for more than a decade, and that is more community-based programs that deal with drug treatment, and not just one kind of program. Culturally based programs, programs that deal with specific areas of drug treatment. There are so many things that we could do that would be cheaper and more effective. And it's been shown that community-based drug treatment is way more effective than drug treatment delivered in a prison facility. Some of the guys have told me that many people in prison do what they call fake it to make it. so that they are in the program, they can get a certificate of completion, but they haven't really gained much from that program. Community-based treatment is much more effective, and the prices, I mean, the comparisons are really staggering. Many years ago, the Rand Corporation came out and said, for every dollar we spend on community-based treatment, drug treatment, we save $7.85 in other costs, which means that we could be using that money to actually provide the services that are needed to help strengthen our community, strengthen families. So another issue is mental health treatment. The number of mentally ill people going into our facilities has risen dramatically. Hawaii is under a settlement agreement, or was under a settlement agreement. The federal monitors are still monitoring OCCC because there was a lawsuit saying that, you know, there are too many people with mental health problems in our facilities and in the criminal justice system. If we know that when mental institutions opened their doors and, you know, turned people onto the street, jails and prisons became the de facto mental health facilities. That's a huge problem because prisons, jails, their first priority is security. They are not trained as mental health counselors. Their first priority is, you know, safety and security. So when you give somebody who has a severe mental illness an order to do something, maybe they heard that order, they remember that order, but maybe 5 minutes later they don't remember that order. We find that people with severe mental illnesses have multiple write-ups, which just increases their classification and their length of stay in prison, meaning that they can't get out at their minimum parole date because they have all these write-ups. So we know that prisons are not the right places for people who are mentally ill. Another thing we could be doing is having more culturally based programs. There was a discussion about programs that are happening in Aotearoa, in Canada, in other parts of the world that have actually, that are based on cultural practices of that place. We know that when you put Hawaiians in a program that is Western based, it's kind of like, for many people, putting them in a place where everything is in the Russian alphabet. You know, the signs are there, it doesn't resonate with them. So we need to understand who our population is in our criminal justice system and establish appropriate programs for those people to reduce their impact, to reduce their involvement and their contact with the criminal justice system, and to reduce the impact of the criminal justice system on the Native Hawaiian population. When you take a Native Hawaiian dad, and you put him in prison, in many cases you are removing the breadwinner from that family. That is really criminal in our estimation, because the research shows that children who have one or both parents incarcerated are 6 to 7 times more likely to be incarcerated themselves. This is not something that we should be promoting. We should be promoting safe families, healthy communities, strengthening families. We need to put our resources where they work. Incarceration has proven not to work. If it did, we wouldn't have such a high rate of recidivism. We would actually be seeing a lesser rate of recidivism. People are not going back to prison because they like it, they like the food, they like the clothing. You know, they're sent back to prison because they have not received the services they need to be successful when they come back into the community. It's all of our responsibility to decrease the populations of our facilities, and especially those of Native Hawaiians. We should be honoring the first people of this land and trying to develop ways that will help them strengthen their families, instead of pointing the finger at them and having people say things like, well, Native Hawaiians are in prison because they're more criminal. They are not. They are no more likely than any other ethnicity to commit crime. Please think about these things. Please, when the task force report comes out, email me, kat@gmail.com. I'll be happy to share anything with you. This is a very critical issue for our community. We're spending much too much on criminal justice and not enough on strengthening our communities. Thank you. Aloha.